Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Last week's episode was on Jurgen Klopp, the people's manager. Be sure to check it out. Today's episode is on Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and megalomaniac murderer who might just be the most powerful figure in football who doesn't really like football. MBS is nominally not the ruler of Saudi Arabia. That's his old father, King Salman. But King Salman lets his favourite son do whatever he likes. So MBS runs the country pretty much by himself and has used a lot of the oil wealth to buy into football. He's not even a direct club owner. You will not see him in the stands at St James's Park. But he's used Saudi money to buy Newcastle United. He's now also pumping billions into the Saudi Pro League. And he's getting ready to host the Men's World Cup in 2034 and probably even the Women's World Cup the year after. That's all for Saudi Arabia, famous feminist state. So we are going to look at MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and why he's got control of so much of football. Before we do, Mehreen, you have a special attachment to Saudi Arabia.
I don't know if it's special, but if you're, like me, one of the 1.5 billion something Muslims in the world who are not from Saudi, you feel very connected to the country. So Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam. It was the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, he was born in Mecca.
He was born in Mecca. That's where the Quran was revealed to him. And most Muslims, if they are practicing, are obliged to go and visit Saudi Arabia at least once in their life to do the pilgrimage in Mecca and Medina. So Saudi is not just any other Middle Eastern country. I think by virtue of its role as a custodian of the most holy places of Islam, it has an emotional resonance to Muslims.
Have you made the Hajj? Have you made the pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia?
I haven't yet made the pilgrimage. I would like to make the sort of pre-pilgrimage, the mini-pilgrimage later this year, God willing. So before MBS comes along, I couldn't have told you who the Crown Prince, the King, various princes in Saudi Arabia were. They all kind of look the same, dressed the same, religious, pious figures who all meld into one.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is one of the handful of most powerful people on earth. And I'd argue that by saying, look, he's only 38, so he could be running Saudi Arabia for another 50 years. He's really the country's first sole dictator. He doesn't share power with all his relatives. And he has his hands on Saudi oil, which gives him trillions of dollars to invest. So he's probably the largest single investor of money on earth. You know, Saudi Arabia has 1/6 of the world's proven petroleum
and the
reserves.
World's largest sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah, so it's an oil well and the center of the Islamic world with a monarchy built on top. So when they decide to go into something like football, like golf, like tennis, it's a pretty mighty force. So who is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and why are they doing this? Why football? Why sport?
So to find out, let's start at the beginning. And how does Mohammed bin Salman grow up as a young kid in Saudi Arabia?
So MBS is born in 1985, and he's the grandson of the founder of modern Saudi Arabia, the king known as Ibn Saud. So he's a prince, but there are thousands of princes. You know, being a Saudi prince is not really a mark of distinction because all the kings have dozens and dozens of children with various wives. So there's loads of them about.
So his father is the 25th son of 36.
Of Ibn Saud.
And MBS is the 6th son of the 25th son of the king, which means that he has probably a better chance of being king than you and I, but it's not that high on the probability score.
He's not going to be king. He's going to be a nobody. Growing up, he's a minor prince. He plays video games. He eats fast food. He harasses his English tutors. And then when he's 16, something quite big happens.
Yeah, and something huge happens for the entire world. 9/11 happens on September the 11th, 2001, when MBS is about 16 years old. And it's, I think, becomes a pretty formative moment for this minor little prince, because overnight, Saudis in the West, and particularly in the US, are pilloried as the enemy. And that's because, one, Osama bin Laden, the perpetrator, is a Saudi national. He comes from one of the most prominent non-royal families in Saudi Arabia.
They're the construction people, the bin Ladens.
The bin Ladens, and 15 of the 19 hijackers of the two planes are also Saudi nationals. Now, there is never any sense that the Saudi crown sanctioned 9/11, and of course bin Laden was an enemy of the Saudi crown as much as he was of the West. But Saudis are suddenly the baddies. And for MBS, who spent most of his time learning about the US through television and video games and admiring the West, has to contend with the fact that his country, his place of birth and his crown is suddenly vilified in the country he probably cares about most, which is America.
Saudi Arabia has gone through the anxiety of 9/11. It's becoming a pariah in the world. MBS also has this much more close to home concern, which is he thinks his family is poor.
Thinks he's a broke boy.
He thinks he's a broke boy. So there's this very telling picture from his teenage years. A lot of Saudi princes on a yacht. I think the very wealthy Prince Al Walid is there. And right on the far edge of the lineup is MBS. He's this minor figure. And so at one point he goes to Salman and says, look, can I open a store? And Salman says, why would you want to do that? But MBS is worried about money. And he starts to develop this fantasy that he's this brilliant businessman. He's a kind of Saudi Steve Jobs. And quite soon he starts a garbage collection firm. He starts real estate companies. He has some success because, of course, if you go around Riyadh and say, you got to help my real estate company, people say, oh, yes, sure, son of the governor of Riyadh, I'll happily help you out. So, he's leveraging.
Been a Nepo baby since day one.
He's a Nepo baby, yeah. I mean, from the start, he's born a Nepo baby. What are you going to do if you're a prince? You're a Nepo baby.
It's tough.
He likes being a Nepo baby. And he uses that to nurture this fantasy of himself as a business person. So that's his youth. And one thing that seems totally absent from his youth is football, right? No evidence.
There is no evidence. I have a harebrained idea that maybe he played Football Manager or FIFA in the 90s.
Well, he played a lot of video games. It
would be difficult to avoid Football Manager, which is one of the greatest computer PC-based games.
Well, I've avoided it. I've never actually.
You don't? Do you know what PC is?
I have not ever played a football video game.
My theory is that maybe that would have been his first interaction with football, which also kind of makes sense the way that he's approached the game, like somebody who's only ever interacted with football through video games. You just buy all the best players and then win the leagues over and over again and then do it over and over again.
Actually, the Saudi League is kind of Football Manager writ large.
Yeah, you buy the best players and then you win the league.
We fast forward to 2014. MBS is 28 years old. Even in Saudi Arabia, hardly anyone has ever heard of him. So how does he go from there, a nobody, to becoming the most powerful ruler in Saudi Arabia's history and one of the most powerful figures in the world?
Simon, how does he get his big break?
There are various half-brothers waiting to become king, and a couple of them die.
There's 25 of them.
Yeah, but it's like a league table. There's number one,
it's
number
like
two.
It's like bowling, isn't it? Some of them pins just get knocked down and suddenly there's only 4 left in the running. It's like horse racing.
A couple of the pins fell over, just withered.
Like the horses.
And then suddenly Salman is in pole position. He becomes king. But when he becomes king, he's already an old man. He's in his late 70s. He's already too old and weak to rule. So MBS is going to rule for him.
He's the favoured son.
He's the favourite son, partly because he never left Saudi. He was always by his daddy's side. So in 2015, MBS is not even the crown prince. He's just made Minister of Defence. Nobody really understands that he's an important figure. But really, Salman has said to him, my boy, you do this for me.
It's like Mufasa.
You run this country for me. Suddenly, a few, ambassadors and politicians in other countries start to notice this guy. He's big, a bit chubby. He's got a huge smile, very charismatic. He's very touchy physically in conversation. He touches you. He's hyperactive. He has this thick Arab accent, doesn't have the beautiful cut-class accents of these hundreds of other princes you were talking about who spent their teenage years studying in the US. So he seems like a real Saudi to people. He's not like a Western-made thing.
He's authentic, as the kids like to say.
He's an authentic figure. And there were 3 Saudi armed forces, and each was under a separate prince, so nobody could have too much power. But MBS, he's not that kind of guy. MBS is very much, I'm going to do this thing myself. So pretty soon he has control of all 3 Saudi armed forces. Nobody's ever had that before. So everyone with a gun in Saudi Arabia ultimately reports to him because he's on this mission to become the country's lone ruler. And anyone who doesn't like it is in trouble.
I think the first sign of trouble was that as soon as this guy becomes someone, he locks up his own mother.
This is an amazing story.
He locks up his mother. His mother is the second wife of his father, but the favoured wife. So Saudi's men have multiple wives. And it's been shrouded in mystery for a long time why he decides to lock his mother up. So his father would periodically say, "Oh,
where's your mother?
Mohammed, I haven't seen mum for a few days." Oh, and he's like, "She's in Europe just doing some R&R, skiing. She's away." And somehow he gets away with this for multiple years. And there are various theories which American diplomats, Western diplomats have put on why MBS decides to lock his mother up. One is that she may have been somehow a threat to him, or she may have been somebody that wanted to check his behaviour, perhaps keep him in line and in control, and also that she would have potentially been a barrier to access to his father as well, for many reasons. It's very unclear why MBS takes a very early decision as soon as he's someone to lock up his mum, but he does.
Although many people will have had similar fantasies. But when it leaks out that, where is the mother, eventually he finds it sufficiently embarrassing that she's released.
She is released many years later, and then suddenly she starts making a few more appearances. But the whole thing is just surrounded in mystery. But I think let's be honest, it's one of the first red flags that we're seeing in a late 20-year-old MBS is that he's decided that his mum's going to the dungeon.
And then you have this issue that he's worried about as a millennial, that 60% or so of the population is under 30. So you have all these young Saudis, and because it's a very restrictive country religiously, it's very hard to meet the opposite sex. There's not much entertainment options. So a lot of people, Saudis, are sitting around at home online, and they're seeing on Instagram the amazing lives being lived by people in other places, and they're bored and frustrated.
He's a representative of his generation, and he is one of the very youngest people to have ever occupied the position of Crown Prince. And he very much wears that identity, his generational identity, as part of his drivers and his motivations. He wants young Saudis to feel as free, as liberated, or as distracted as people in Western countries.
So he's really going for it. And he has this idea, every problem can be fixed by me, and I'm just going to do this now, fast, hard.
Well, going back to teenage MBS who thought he could be Steve Jobs, he's got an idea which is not a bad idea, which is that Saudi Arabia is economically entirely reliant on one number. That number is the oil price. When it's high, he has loads of money. When it's low, they run out of money. And that has been the story of Saudi probably for the last 3 or 4 decades, probably since the 1970s, that they are constantly cash strapped. So he thinks, I got to diversify away from oil. What can I do? Tourism, that sounds like a good idea. The UAE, everyone wants to go to Dubai on holiday. Nobody ever stops on the way to Saudi. I mean, he's right. Dubai is an open air theme park for the world's rich and famous. It's basically a zoo. And so he thinks one way to diversify the economy is to create this country which has huge beauty, actually, untapped, unspoilt
coral reefs.
Yeah. And I'm going to turn it into not only a tourist attraction, but a business hub where global businesses are going to set up with light regulation, and unbridled capitalism is going to thrive and flourish in Saudi Arabia, of all countries, and make me rich once again. I have to stop worrying about the oil price so much.
He thinks, right, I've got to reform Saudi Arabia. We have to reform or die. We can't just live off oil anymore. We have to find other sources of wealth. In some ways, it is accurate to say that he modernized Saudi Arabia, but he has done so while being a brutal dictator.
Yeah, it's come at a price. And the price, ironically, is civil liberties for lots of people.
In this hyperactive phase, he also blockades Qatar. There's a lot of bad blood between Qatar and Saudi Arabia that we don't need to get into. But one thing that's relevant to Heroes and Humans is that Saudi Arabia's got jealous of Qatar planning to host the World Cup.
Yes.
The Saudis kind of wish they thought of that earlier. Qatar has a World Cup. The other neighbour, Abu Dhabi, owns Manchester City. And they're getting all this publicity, not necessarily good. And MBS is kind of jealous of that. So they blockade Qatar like, you can't import milk anymore. You're going to have to surrender to our wishes. But the Qataris are so rich that if they can't import milk, they just fly in cows. And so the Qataris managed to ride out this 3-year blockade fairly comfortably. And in the end, he has to make up with them. He also tries to actually grab a slice of Qatar's World Cup. So I was tipped off about this by somebody on the Qatari side, that while Qatar was preparing for the World Cup, MBS and the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, cook up this plan to expand the World Cup from 32 teams to 48. Qatar's too small to host 48 teams.
Countries.
And then Qatar would have to give some of it to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, the stadiums, yeah.
So they put a lot of pressure on Qatar to do this, but he fails. Qatar gets to host the World Cup by itself, but all that gives MBS an idea for the future, which will become reality. He loves going to the West and meeting people like Donald Trump, who loves Saudi Arabia, Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, all these people, Jeff Bezos, very excited. And then in the greatest show on earth, the opening match of the World Cup 2018, there is MBS. I remember very clearly, I was in Moscow. Opening match is Russia, Saudi Arabia. And in the VIP of VIP boxes, side by side, chatting and joking together, are Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, Vladimir Putin, needs no further introduction, and MBS. It ends up being a very humiliating afternoon for MBS because a pretty mediocre Russia team beats Saudi Arabia 5-0. But that is his sort of coming out to the world population.
As a football man.
As a figure, as a kind of, at the biggest popular culture moment in the planet's history, there he is, sitting in the main VIP box.
And Putin's not a bad guy to learn how to reputation launder through sporting tournaments with, right? Russia got a lot of glowing coverage throughout that World Cup.
Yeah.
Which has not aged very well at all.
MBS is becoming an object of veneration for the world's business leaders. Political leaders are very excited about this young guy who's changing Saudi Arabia. But then he does something so visibly ugly that for a couple of weeks, even the most craven business people can't really be friends with him. They have to pretend to condemn it. And this is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
A journalist for the Washington Post, a columnist. His reputation really takes a hit with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi doesn't think that MBS is the classic democratic modern figure that some parts of the West do seem to think that he will be. And he actually thinks that there's something much darker and dangerous about MBS, and he begins writing about it. And crucially, he's writing about it for the Washington Post in English, and he's one of the few Saudi commentators that is getting a lot of traction in the West as somebody who knows the country very well. And for MBS, who's obsessed with what Americans and what America thinks about him, this is intolerable. He becomes obsessed with the figure of Khashoggi, and it ends brutally with a visit that Khashoggi pays to the Saudi consulate because he needs a marriage certificate while he's in Turkey. And that's where he ultimately meets his demise. He's met by a team of, it sounds like, up to 15 to 18 Saudi nationals, engineers, doctors, people whose job it is to kill him and also decapitate his body with a saw.
And I think it's that gruesome detail which makes it very hard to forget.
Yeah. For a couple of weeks, Khashoggi goes missing. The Saudis deny that they have anything to do with it. They say that he hasn't been killed. They don't know where he is. But the Turks play quite a big role in leaking the footage, leaking reports to Western media about the fact that they have evidence that he was murdered in the consulate. And within a couple of weeks of that, there is beginning to be wide-scale condemnation of the role that MBS, even if he may not have been directly involved, ultimately sanctioned the assassination of a journalist.
I think the CIA say we're pretty sure that he sanctioned it. And for a few weeks, business leaders have to pretend that they can't be seen with MBS, so Jeff Bezos doesn't come to Saudi Arabia.
And, it looks like that actually for the first time in his young career as Crown Prince, MBS has taken it a bit too far.
Yeah, so really everything he's tried in these first few years has not worked out. The war in Yemen has become a disaster, kind of Vietnam War scenario. The Qatar blockade has failed. Qatar won. His hostility to Iran hasn't worked out. Iran's still going strong. And so he thinks maybe I should gain global esteem and admiration through soft power, not hard power, not going around killing people, but making them love and admire me. So maybe I should try through sport. Taking over global football should be a doddle in comparison with trying to remake Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and the world, right?
Find out after the break.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan. Welcome back. So, Simon, we've told the story of MBS, who's a crown prince like no other. He's embarked on a kamikaze foreign policy, murdered a journalist on foreign soil, and is upending centuries of religious conservatism in the birthplace of Islam. He's impulsive, violent, and rules the kingdom unchallenged, purging his enemies wherever he finds them.
Even his mother.
And so now he thinks, sport.
Sport is the route to global dominance. And sport is also one of those shiny things that MBS likes. He's bought into Uber, bought into WeWork, companies that have not worked out brilliantly for him. He secretly has bought the world's most expensive painting, Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci, even though it shows Jesus Christ as the savior of the world, which is not really an Islamic concept. And after they buy it, they don't really know what to do with the painting, so it seems to have disappeared into a warehouse. But then he thinks, aha, sport. That will please all these young Saudis who are bored and have nothing to do. They'll make me see that I'm in touch with the kids. He thinks sport worked out nicely for Qatar. They had the 2022 World Cup. Everybody's liking that. And he's also late to the game, because the royal family of Abu Dhabi have been buying into sport. Abu Dhabi's own Manchester City, the Qataris own Paris Saint-Germain. So what he's doing is really very unoriginal. If you're a Gulf monarchy, you buy football clubs because what else are you going to do?
Yeah, and it's part of a broader strategy where he wants to allow Saudis to have, as you said, stuff to do. And ultimately, I think that's also a political strategy, because he's looked around at the UAE and thought, well, they do a really good job of making sure that their citizens are constantly distracted and occupied by fun stuff to do. The UAE, or Dubai in particular, is just a giant open air theme park. And the political strategy is that if you have citizens who are occupied doing shiny stuff, spending money, being materialistic, they will be not too bothered about the fact that they don't really have too many political freedoms, that they won't agitate for democracy. And that's also why I think sport is important, because it allows young Saudis to have access to the world's biggest sports stars, just as they're getting access to the world's biggest singers, rappers, movie stars. Anyone of any renown is coming and passing by Saudi Arabia, and that's all for domestic consumption.
But another part of it is that MBS sees himself as a business genius. He's a brilliant investor, he thinks. And so he has this harebrained idea that he's investing in football, that if you just bring Neymar and Cristiano Ronaldo to Saudi Arabia,
you'll sell loads of shirts.
You'll sell loads of shirts, but also everyone is then going to come to Saudi Arabia on holiday, and the football clubs will become profitable, whereas almost no football club in the history of the universe has ever been profitable. So he has this ridiculous business plan to make money from football. And then there's the World Cup. So by the time the Qatar World Cup has rolled around, the Saudis and Qataris have made friends again, and MBS shows up to the opening match in a Qatar scarf. But I bet he was secretly pleased when Qatar played probably the worst match in the history of the World Cup.
Was he there when Saudi became the only team in that World Cup to beat Argentina? The Where's Messi match?
I don't think he was there. I was there.
You were there. Where's Messi? Yeah. Where was Messi, Simon?
I was at that Argentina-Saudi match. And it was very interesting to me because it's the only time I've seen loads and loads of Saudi Arabian fans out in the wild. 99% of them men, one woman in a burqa. They were just so happy. They'd driven across the border into Qatar, and then in the metro afterwards, they were chatting to everyone. This is the best day of their lives, beating.
It's the best day for the Saudi national team in their history.
Yeah,
best day for Saudi football ever.
They'd always been the joke of the World Cup. And this was it. This was a moment. What really struck me as somebody who hasn't had much at that point close contact with Saudi football is that this is a country with loads of fans, a real football culture. I mean, one of the strongest teams in Asia historically. It's not like Qatar where there was no football history at all. A lot of the Saudi population really has cared about football and about their clubs forever. And that really came home to me that day. And in fact, we have a guest on, Ahmed Al Omran, who's my Financial Times colleague. He's a Saudi and he's our Saudi Arabia correspondent. He spoke to us from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and he told us about the experience of going to football matches in Saudi Arabia.
Roll the clip.
You like football. You've been to Saudi games, I imagine. Can you describe the experience, going to the game, the stadium, what it's all like?
Sure. I mean, it depends on whether you're in a big city or not. I mean, Jeddah, which is the second largest city in the country and has the biggest stadium currently, King Abdullah Stadium. Going to a game typically requires leaving my house at least 2 hours before the game starts because the drive can take a while, the traffic jams, and there's no other way to reach the stadium. There's practically no public transport means to reach the stadium. New stadiums like King Abdullah Stadium have good seating, good services, but they're also built in a way that is not integrated within their surrounding. So there isn't much around the stadium. It's basically a parking lot and empty pieces of land. Once the game started, it's very normal for any game. The fans are, especially here in Jeddah, the fans of Ittihad and Ahli are very passionate. Their attendance is regularly very decent. Usually there are also games in halftime. They give awards to the fans to encourage them to come. Once the game is over, you funnel out of the stadium and you have to get stuck in traffic again to try to get home. Most of the games are played late in the evening because it's too hot during the day. So the games are typically played, 8 p.m. or after 8 p.m. It can be pretty late by the time the game is over and you're trying to get back home. But since most of the games are played on weekends, that's usually not a huge issue.
That was very interesting. And it sounds like even though there are stadiums and teams, getting to a Saudi football match and getting home is not easy. It sounds like being in London, to be honest.
Yeah, or worse. So MBS is at the World Cup in Qatar and he sees, wow, Qatar is gaining renown in the world. People whine about how badly they treat LGBTQ people and migrants and women, but in the end, everyone accepts them.
Celebrities everywhere, global influencers. It's the centre of the world for about 6 weeks.
And MBS gets really jealous and thinks, we can do that. We're like Qatar, but we're much bigger and we have this real football culture, which they don't have. And he's got close to Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, and Infantino loves MBS because MBS has all this money to spend. He's willing to put billions and billions literally into football, which nobody else is. And so Infantino and MBS cook up this plan. Let's do the World Cup in Saudi Arabia. You know, sure, people will whine about all the people we've killed, but who cares? Everyone bought Qatar, so they'll
another
just have
Winter
to
World
suck
Cup.
it up. Probably a Winter World Cup.
2034.
And so MBS and Infantino think, right, Saudi Arabia gets the World Cup. Saudi Arabia's willing to put in loads of money and give money to, you know, the Maldives and lots of poorer African federations, whatever it takes. Infantino says, well, for the World Cup 2034, we're going to change the bidding rules in ways that exclude the only other serious bid, Australia. And we've written the bidding rules so that really only Saudi Arabia can get this World Cup. And the Australians realize FIFA doesn't want us, so they withdraw their bid. MBS gets the 2034
Unchallenged.
Unchallenged, they're the only bidder. I think they haven't officially been awarded it yet, but usually when you're the only bidder, you have a pretty good chance. And MBS sort of thinks, oh, well, also because I'm the champion of women, why don't we also just get the Women's World Cup 2035? And
Yeah, they'll have all the stadiums, all the infrastructure. What are they going to do with it?
Yeah.
He's not only buying football, he buys golf. He buys snooker. Loads of boxing matches now taking place in Saudi Arabia, mixed martial arts, mainly the UFC. Saudi has become a sporting destination with at least 5 or 6 main landmark events every year that are not to do with football.
But the biggest thing is football. But by the time they get into football, you know, a lot of the trophy assets have been sold already. So you look at the Premier League, what are you going to buy? And you end up with Newcastle United. Weirdly, the initial idea that the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund should buy Newcastle came from an American Instagram influencer called Carla Di Bello, who is a former producer on Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Yes.
So Carla Di Bello goes to the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, who is very fond of Carla, and Yasser Al-Rumayyan, and she says, look, you know, you should buy Newcastle United. And she says, I know, I can handle it. I can manage this whole investment.
Yeah, she makes a lot of money out of it.
Yeah, well, they say, well, you don't have to handle it. It's fine, Carla, but here's 2 million quid.
An introduction fee.
Yeah, she got paid as an introducer. And they buy Newcastle, and Newcastle fans delighted. They don't think, oh, this is a mass murderer. They think, brilliant.
They take their shirts off, put on their condoras, and start waving Saudi flags around. I remember when the deal almost didn't happen initially. There were a couple of attempts and the government kept getting involved. And my Geordie mates were just in tears. They were so desperate to get rid of, 1, Mike Ashley, and 2, to be the property of a Saudi prince, because they thought it would deliver them, 1, loads of new players and lots of success. And to be honest, we're nearly 3 seasons in. They're not doing too bad.
Yeah,
they got relegated, and so now they're back in the top flight and in the top half of the Premier League.
Yeah, well, when Newcastle bought them, they were a rubbish team at the bottom of the Premier League, and now they're, you know, one of the better teams in the Premier League.
Yeah, they'll qualify for Europe this year, and they win Champions League this season.
Yeah, I mean, we'd already tested the proposition that lots of ill-gotten oil wealth will improve your football team, as you know, as a Chelsea fan.
No
It
brainer.
works. It works.
No brainer. It works for a while.
You know, the golfies are really sort of monopolising the top of football. I think a seminal moment was last year when Manchester City become the first golf-owned club to win the Champions League, and I suspect not the last one either. Golf owners are really in pole position in global football because they're happy to spend whatever it takes. The Qataris at Paris Saint-Germain, the Abu Dhabi royal family of Manchester City, the Saudis at Newcastle, and maybe somewhere else soon. And they don't really have any rivals because the Russian owners have kind of been pushed out of football since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Chinese looked into football about a decade ago, but later Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, said to his billionaires, don't do it, guys. Don't spend your money on these luxury things abroad. And the Americans are in football, but they're trying to make money from football.
And there's now talk of different types of Qataris and different types of Saudis buying clubs. So Manchester United were linked to the Qatar royal family. When Chelsea were up for sale, there was a mysterious Saudi bidder. So it feels like they can have multiple clubs at the same time, which just seems ridiculous. But Saudi Gulf money will just become inescapable. It's everywhere. Everyone will be touched by it.
But what they then start to do is they start to pump money into the Saudi league. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the PIF, is told you're going to buy the biggest 4 Saudi clubs, and then you're going to spend loads of money just getting big, shiny names in. So they use this money to buy Cristiano Ronaldo. They bring in Jordan Henderson. He doesn't like it. He goes home quite soon. Benzema, Neymar, who unfortunately gets injured quite quickly.
Conte, Mendy.
Yeah.
Also, just kind of middling journeyman players in La Liga and the Premier League end up on incredible wages, which is basically going to change their life. Mitrovic from Fulham was one example of this. The Serbian striker who's approaching 30, he has a great season in England, but you just can't turn down that money. It's life-changing amounts of money that they're throwing at these players.
Yeah, I was interested. I saw an interview with Koulibaly,
Koulibaly's the same.
French-Senegalese defender, and he was not old.
No.
So he was asking, why are you going to Saudi Arabia, this bad football league? And he said, look, I run all these charities in Senegal. I'm supporting hundreds of people there, and this Saudi money will allow me to just expand the reach of what I do massively. And I say, if that's what you're doing with your money, just respect. A lot of footballers, especially from poor countries, especially from African countries, they're not using their money to buy Ferraris.
Sadio Mane is another one.
They're using their money to support loads and loads of people. You know, your cousin has cancer, your cousin's friend has cancer, somebody's friends' kids want to go to high school. You pay for that whole thing. I mean, Samuel Eto'o has been doing that in Cameroon for many years. So I understand a lot of these footballers taking that money.
And they also play on the lifestyle thing. So for a lot of Muslim footballers, they tell them, well, actually going to be really close to pilgrimage sites. You know, here life is much more simple. You're sort of away from all of the trappings and the temptations of the West. And you can live a pious life with your wife and kids and nobody will bother you. And it's not clear whether that is a big pull, but they are attracting a lot of Muslim players. And I think that is going to be a strategy. And the one we know that they really, really want is Mohammed Salah.
Although Karim Benzema is a Muslim, very identified as a Muslim, and he doesn't seem to be totally happy in Saudi Arabia.
Well, all of his Instagram pages of him with a prayer mat and going, standing outside the Kaaba. So
maybe it's working out for him.
Maybe. Not only are the Saudis developing their league, but I've noticed that they're getting reasonably good matches to be held in Saudi Arabia in the middle of the season. So for the last 2 years running, the domestic cups in Italy and Spain, the cup finals have been held in Saudi Arabia. So this is sort of the equivalent of the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup. In the middle of the season, the players jump on private jets and go and play this match. Not a testimonial, a competitive match for a trophy in Saudi Arabia. And luckily for them, the last 2 seasons, it's been Inter Milan, AC Milan, 2 seasons ago, who played their cup match, which is the biggest game in Italy, and Barcelona versus Real Madrid, the biggest match in Spain. So, we could see Arsenal, Manchester City, FA Cup final in Jeddah in 2028. Why not?
The FA Cup has been sufficiently devalued that the English would sell it to Saudi Arabia. I could imagine that.
Yeah, I think that might be the future.
But MBS's, brilliant game plan to buy the whole of football and create this incredibly successful domestic league, which makes big profits, not really working out. In fact, like almost all MBS's previous plans, like the blockade of Qatar, like the war in Yemen, not brilliant success, like buying into WeWork. So the Saudi League, disappointing crowds, low TV rights sales. Do you know anyone who, has anyone ever said to you, oh, did you see last night's Saudi match?
I see clips on Twitter and YouTube, but that's usually just of Ronaldo, no one else.
Yeah, it doesn't
I didn't
seem
even know
to
where to
spread
watch
massively.
it if I wanted to.
Even Ronaldo, their prize asset, age 39, upset Saudis when he grabbed his crotch while fans were chanting Messi at him. So Ronaldo has not fully, let's say, adapted to Saudi customs. My brilliant Financial Times colleague John Byrne Murdoch came up with some really interesting stats on the league. The average crowd size that a player at one of the top 3 Saudi clubs plays in front of, so one of the top 3 clubs, the average crowd size is just over 15,000. Now that's below League One in England. Yeah, because MBS has poured all this money into football, but I don't think he's spending much time watching what's happening, but he does vaguely realise not many people are coming to stadiums. Sure, the first Neymar match, the first Ronaldo match, stadium is full, but otherwise these stadiums are pretty empty. The clubs are losing money. I know that the finance ministry is grumbling about why has the Crown Prince decided that we have to pour all this money into the bottomless hole that is football. The finance ministry just wants to wind up the league, which may well happen. So I don't think MBS thinks, oh, right, this Saudi league is a brilliant success. And I think the time will come in a couple of years when they say, okay, guys, turn off the money tap. So why did MBS buy into football? I mean, let's see, there's all these reasons that come together that make it perfect for him. It's vanity. Everybody watches football. You become famous. It's keeping the young people of Saudi Arabia happy, giving them some entertainment.
MBS thinks that football and lots of other things like music and live events will stop young Saudis from agitating for more freedoms.
It's also MBS's insane business fantasies that you can run football clubs profitably, which pretty much nobody outside Manchester United or Arsenal has ever achieved, and certainly the Saudis are not going to achieve. But it's another of his harebrained business ideas, almost none of which have worked out. And a little bit, it's impressing powerful Western countries in particular, making them feel that Saudi is a big player in world affairs, is a serious country.
It can't be ignored.
Yeah. And so football kind of ticks every box for him.
Yeah, it's perfect. Football satisfies his pipe dream of being a businessman. It also helps act as another distraction for young Saudis. And it's also a great ego trip. So it hits all three of, I think, some of the character traits that he's shown in various endeavours, including domestic policy, how he runs foreign policy, and what he wants Saudi Arabia to be.
And there's another thing, I think it's also boredom.
Yeah.
I mean, if your whole family has way too much money than they know what to do with,
You just run out of stuff to do.
you just run out of stuff to do, so you might as well buy Cristiano Ronaldo. What do you think MBS thinks about his investment in football? Do you think it's working out for him? And is he going to stick with it?
I think probably he broadly has an inability to understand or think that he might have failed at something and that he needs to retrench. And also, I think the failure of the Saudi League isn't that important if indeed it does get wound up, because I think his whole shtick is to create Saudi as a destination, a place where people want to come and where people who live in the country think this is a great place to live. And in that sense, in the last couple of weeks, I think I've watched a Formula One race in Riyadh.
You watch Formula One?
Yeah, I actually do watch and care about sport. I stayed up until about midnight to watch Anthony Joshua in a boxing match knock out his opponent from MMA in Saudi Arabia. And in all of these events, when they're happening...
Can I just say that your life sounds really unhealthy?
I just, I actually do care about sport, which is why I'm doing this podcast for you. I know it's like going to the ballet or something, but, some of us are genuinely invested in this kind of stuff. And I think what's happened is that Saudi has just become a normal place where people host sporting events. And crucially, when events are held in Saudi, for example, Anthony Joshua knocks out his opponent, Ngannou, and then he stands up in the middle of the ring and says, I want to thank the Saudi royalty, the crown prince, and everyone who put on this great event. When I watch WWE, which is not a real sport, wrestling, fake wrestling, they pay homage to the crown. And that kind of stuff is worth its weight in gold to MBS, right? Can you imagine Tyson Fury in Manchester in an arena saying, oh, Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives, thank you so much for putting on my boxing match. I mean, people throw potatoes at him.
Yeah, maybe we should cut that bit out, because whenever you say Rishi Sunak, by the time we broadcast it, he'll probably be gone.
He won't be Prime Minister. So I think that level of, approbation and the ego that he has, that's important to him. And the truth is that people don't grump about going to Saudi Arabia anymore. And when you say to them, oh, it's got a terrible human rights record, a lot of people, and a lot of younger people also in the West, will be like, well, why is Saudi any worse than Russia? And why is Saudi any worse than all the other bad countries? Why is Saudi any worse than the US, who fund millions of dollars of weapons to kill people in Palestine? So we're in a world of moral relativism, and I think MBS really benefits from that. And he's not going to attract that much scrutiny as a result.
Yeah, I mean, he's a cruel dictator, but there are a lot of them about nowadays. And he's a cruel dictator who can put money into whatever project it is that you have, or whatever football club that you need to have bought. And
in the long run, he's sort of been proven right. He murdered Jamal Khashoggi, and there was a couple of weeks or even a few months of criticism and attack. But all of those people, the Richard Bransons, the Bill Gates, the Wefs, they all came back. They all forgot about it within a couple of years, because the pull of Saudi Arabia, the luxury, the temptations and the money is just too much to resist.
He might jettison the league, as I said, but he's going to stick with the World Cup. So he's going to get the world's
trophy.
Biggest festival.
And you're going to go, Simon, and you're going to report about it like all the other World Cups you did.
Well, I mean, I think as a journalist, you shouldn't boycott going to countries. You should be writing about countries. I was in Qatar and I wrote very largely about the football, I'll admit, but I had two Financial Times colleagues who were writing about the politics, etc. of Qatar. So I felt that my newspaper was covering that. So yeah, if I'm allowed to go to the World Cup in Saudi, I will go. If anyone sends me there, I'll go. And I would hope I would write about Saudi Arabia critically and that my colleagues would. But I agree with you that it's becoming normalized and that it's very hard to find a country that feels it has the moral high ground to criticize Saudi Arabia from, despicable as the things that MBS have done for the last 10 years are.
And we often talk about the term sports washing, and sports washing is used quite a lot in the context of, slightly horrible, dark people using their money to launder their reputations. But I think we both agree that MBS doesn't really care
He
about
doesn't
what
care
people
so much.
think
I
of
mean,
him.
he knows that we think he's a cruel dictator, but it doesn't bother him.
It doesn't matter. As long as his friends and his tech mates still want to hang out with him, he honestly doesn't really care enough to sports wash in that sort of concerted way that perhaps others do.
Yeah, I think Qatar cared much more about what the world thinks about it. MBS doesn't particularly care. He also thinks we're a massive country. We have a sixth of the world's oil reserves. You just all have to suck it up.
And even if he doesn't want to do sports washing, he still benefits from all the things that sports washing does. And we spoke about this in the Abramovich episode, is that there are a few 100,000, I don't know, maybe even millions of Newcastle fans who are entirely happy and pleased and relieved that they are the ownership of the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. They think they're in a much better position financially because of it. And they probably wouldn't give up their owners for anyone else. And that's the benefit of sports washing, by accident or design.
So you and I did an episode on Roman Abramovich, who bought your club, Chelsea, and you're still a bit of a fangirl of Abramovich despite everything. What are the parallels between Abramovich and MBS? I mean, Abramovich in the end is forced out of English football in disgrace after Russia invaded Ukraine, and he's seen as an accessory to the crime. So things don't really end that well for him. Do you see a similar ending for MBS?
I think with Abramovich as a fan, it always felt a bit precarious because he wasn't the guy. He was the tycoon, the businessman, the oligarch. But ultimately, he was tied to the country, Russia, and whose political ambitions of its leader he couldn't really control. We could get to a point where MBS's hubris is so insane that he does something that is so egregious in world affairs, invade a country, drop a massive bomb, develop nuclear weapons, annoy the Americans.
Well, he's already invaded Yemen, but you mean invade a powerful country.
A powerful country
like,
with
Iran.
nuclear weapons, which is, the beginning of a World War III moment. Or finds himself on the wrong side of very powerful allies who turn against him, then we can see a moment where the shutters close on Saudi Arabia. It becomes a pariah state. They're under financial sanctions in the same way that's happened to Putin's Russia. But honestly, and given the story that we've told, where he has been chastened by some of his extended, or some of the overreach he's done on geopolitics, you probably think that he might be over that phase. And if MBS is going to mature and become a little bit less naive about the world and how to play it, you probably think that he's going to be around in sport forever.
Unlike Abramovich, as you say, he is the principal.
He's the guy.
He runs the whole country by himself. So what we're saying is MBS is a brutal dictator who has bought a very large chunk of our beloved sport, and almost everybody just accepts it.
Including potentially Saudis, and that's the main question. So if the strategy is to distract your citizens to death, so they never want too many political freedoms and they don't question the social contract, then maybe MBS will be incredibly successful. He can probably look at the UAE as a pioneer of doing this strategy. Democracy is the thing that scares Arab monarchies and Arab dictatorships much more than I think their reputations in the West or what Americans think about them. This is existential. And in that sense, because this is existential, I don't think MBS is going to be giving up sport anytime soon.
So we always ask about our main character, what would he have been if he hadn't been a footballer? Well, MBS is not a footballer, so what would he have been if he hadn't been a Saudi prince? What is his other life? And I see him as a failed entrepreneur, one of those people, who's saying, well, my last business venture.
Idea.
Yeah, I got a business idea. My last one didn't really work out, but you want to put some money into my new business idea. Just somebody who kind of perennially fails at business. Has a startup, always goes wrong, big dreamer.
People whose business cards say founder, but there's not a name of a company afterwards.
Yeah, and you feel that there's something a bit nasty about them. So you don't want to inquire too closely about what happens
and you don't want to invest.
You don't want to invest, and you don't really want to hang out with the person. They seem a little bit...
I think that even that gives him a lot of credit because at least he'd be sort of hustling. I think he'd go back to his first and only love, which is video games. I think he'd probably, if he was a little bit younger, he'd be a sort of moderately well-known streamer on Twitch where he'd go live every day, eat fast food and play games for 12 hours a day and, want to be an influencer and enjoy all the trappings that come from it. He'd probably be involved in like crypto schemes or drop shipping or multi-level marketing, all of the internet harebrained ideas to get rich quick, and would drive his dad's Lamborghini and tell everyone that it was his own. I think he is a thoroughly millennial figure and a product of his generation.
Your generation.
My generation.
I worry after this podcast that you're not going to be invited to MBS's next Davos in the desert.
I mean, maybe I'll just have to go to the real one instead.
Would you like to spend an evening with him in the palace?
I'm pretty scared of him, so I'm going to say no. I don't think I'd make it out of the palace, given what we know about when MBS calls you up for an invite. You don't often know if you're going to make it out.
I suppose the question is, will he have heard this Heroes and Humans episode?
Do you think he's going to stream it on all his favourite podcast platforms?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't sleep, so he gets a lot done. But
It's the point where we both start panicking.
yeah, no, I don't think I'll be taking up that invitation.
Really? You
either.
wouldn't? For an FT magazine piece, like just go,
Well, if the
editor
Financial
says, I've got
Times-
it signed off. You're spending 3 days with MBS.
Yeah, so
embedded.
the Financial Times comes to me and they say, okay, we got this interview with MBS, fly to Riyadh, you're seeing him Wednesday at 9. I mean, obviously it would be a good journalistic get, right? But would he really disappear me? I show up to the palace and the Financial Times are waiting for my article, but then I disappear.
No.
Yeah.
I wouldn't inquire about your whereabouts.
No,
I'll be like, I'm the single host of the Heroes and Humans podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms.
Next week's episode is on Carlo Ancelotti, the pig farmer's son who became every player's favourite manager. Be sure to check it out.
This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
And Simon Cooper.
and this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.